Supermicro launches 4-socket servers for AI needs. Supermicro has started shipping its latest 4-socket X14 servers, powered by Intel Xeon 6 processors with performance cores, P-cores, as it looks to regain enterprise momentum following recent setbacks. The launch of 4-socket servers by Supermicro reflects a growing enterprise need for localized compute that can support memory-bound AI and reduce the complexity of distributed architectures. The modern 4-socket servers solve multiple pain points that have intensified with Gen AI and memory-intensive analytics. Enterprises are increasingly challenged by latency, interconnect complexity, and power budgets in distributed environments. High-capacity, scale-up servers provide an architecture that is more aligned with low latency, large model processing, especially where data residency or compliance constraints limit cloud elasticity, said Sanchit Gogia, Chief Analyst and CEO at Greyhound Research. As quoted in NetworkWorld, in an article authored by Nitty Single published on July 17, 2025. Beyond the media quote, our view in full. Press for time, you can focus solely on the Greyhound flashpoints that follow. Each one distills the full analysis into a sharp, executive-ready takeaway, combining our official standpoint, validated through Pulse data from ongoing CXO trackers, and grounded in field notes from real-world advisory engagements. 4-socket servers address AI bottlenecks, memory pressure, and data center complexity. Greyhound Flashpoint. The resurgence of 4-socket platforms reflects enterprise need for localized compute that can support memory-bound AI workloads and reduce distributed system sprawl. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 68% of infrastructure decision-makers cite memory architecture and energy footprint as major roadblocks in scaling AI on-prem. Multi-socket servers, especially those supporting 12+ memory channels per CPU, offer a strategic middle ground between GPU clusters and costly hyperscale expansions. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, modern 4-socket servers solve multiple pain points that have intensified with Gen AI and memory-intensive analytics. Enterprises are increasingly challenged by latency, interconnect complexity, and power budgets in distributed environments. High-capacity, scale-up servers provide an architecture that is more aligned with low latency, large model processing, especially where data residency or compliance constraints limit cloud elasticity. However, this architectural pivot requires buyers to rethink their rack power density, cooling solutions, and firmware audit workflows, issues that often stall enterprise-scale deployment. Greyhound Pulse. Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025 finds that 54% of enterprises exploring AI workloads beyond pilot stages cite memory limitations, rather than GPU scarcity, as their primary infrastructure bottleneck. Among regulated industries in Asia and Europe, 63% are evaluating high-socket count systems as a bridge between legacy virtualization stacks and GPU-heavy inferencing needs. These workloads increasingly demand single-node deployments with large memory footprints, high I/O, and predictable availability, factors better addressed by newer 4-socket servers. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note, a government agency seeking to support multi-language NLP models in-house faced inconsistent response times on a distributed dual-socket server cluster. After pivoting to a 4-socket scale-up architecture, the agency noted improved inference predictability and reduced node failure rates. However, the transition required recalibrating data center floor space, increasing airflow controls, and revisiting memory cooling profiles. For buyers, the lesson is clear. The performance gains are real, but success hinges on pre-planning for thermal impact, firmware lifecycle, and per-rack power variability. Enterprise buyers must balance hardware innovation with lifecycle integration. Greyhound Flashpoint. While performance benchmarks in this segment are converging across vendors, enterprise preference is tilting towards OEMs that offer integrated orchestration, lifecycle telemetry, and firmware resilience. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 62% of large enterprises cite platform consistency and patch cadence as decisive factors in server refresh cycles, outweighing even raw performance. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, the shift to AI-adjacent workloads has changed what CIOs demand from server vendors. It is no longer sufficient to deliver performance leadership. Enterprises now require secure firmware lifecycles, telemetry standardization, and compatibility with existing orchestration tools. Vendors without a full-stack narrative that spans compute, cooling, management, and support often struggle to move beyond tactical deployments. The high-density, high-risk nature of 4-socket systems amplifies these concerns. Greyhound Pulse. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 59% of enterprise buyers now require lifecycle assurance spanning 5 to 7 years for core infrastructure, including BIOS and firmware roadmap transparency. Among this group, 72% report vendor integration with platforms like Ansible, Terraform, or proprietary data center automation as a top 3 evaluation criteria, particularly for servers with dense memory and multi-GPU configurations. Greyhound Field Note. In one Greyhound Field Note, an energy sector enterprise ran into unexpected compliance failures when attempting to deploy high socket count servers into a tightly governed data center fabric. While the hardware delivered excellent thermal and performance metrics in lab settings, real-world deployment stalled due to missing BIOS audit trail documentation and a lack of orchestration plugin support for the company's automation stack. The advisory takeaway: ensure that hardware innovation is matched by enterprise-grade integration, especially for regulated environments. Multi-socket hardware launches signal market realignment post-high-profile deal shifts. Greyhound Flashpoint. In the wake of headline-grabbing shifts in large AI infrastructure deals, new server launches in the 4-socket category represent more than performance progression. They're signaling intent to reassert strategic relevance. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 46% of infrastructure leaders now scrutinize vendor maturity and partner ecosystem alignment more heavily than launch claims, particularly in the post-XAI competitive landscape. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, server vendors responding to recent deal losses or market perception slumps are increasingly launching platform resets, leveraging new silicon or thermal efficiency gains to re-enter strategic enterprise conversations. However, performance alone rarely restores confidence. Buyers are now prioritizing interlock with chip vendors, delivery consistency, and long-term product roadmap visibility. Unless paired with evidence of operational maturity and channel stability, even the most technically compelling launch risks being seen as defensive optics rather than forward motion. Greyhound Pulse. CIO Pulse 2025 shows that 41% of AI infrastructure buyers have modified their server shortlist criteria in response to vendor performance in recent high-profile deals. Among these, 33% now actively require evidence of ecosystem support, software certifications, hyperscaler reference architectures, or ISV alignment before greenlighting 4-socket deployments. The appetite for performance has not declined, but it is now inseparable from reputational and execution risk. Greyhound Field Note. A recent field note from an industrial R&D lab exploring AI-driven predictive modeling noted that while a vendor's server offered best-in-class thermal load management and memory capacity, it was not shortlisted due to a lack of public cloud integration references and minimal support for KML frameworks. The evaluation team flagged ecosystem underrepresentation as a bigger risk than hardware bottlenecks. For others in similar stages of evaluation, this highlights the importance of strategic ecosystem alignment beyond spec sheet. Governance and transparency now sit at the core of server procurement risk. Greyhound Flashpoint. In today's climate, governance standing is inseparable from enterprise server procurement. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, only 23% of Fortune 1000 CIOs currently describe hardware vendors as governance resilient, a sharp decline from 38% the previous year. As audit scrutiny and ESG mandates rise, large buyers demand proof of financial integrity and lifecycle transparency before committing to next-generation hardware. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, recent governance lapses across the IT infrastructure industry, ranging from auditor exits to SEC probes and opaque supply chains, have changed how CIOs and risk officers evaluate hardware suppliers. For enterprise buyers, particularly in public sector and financial services, governance health now carries equal weight to technical performance. Server refresh cycles are increasingly shaped by reputational audits, not just data center load planning. Greyhound Pulse. Our CIO Pulse 2025 data indicates that 44% of public sector and regulated enterprise buyers are subject to procurement clauses requiring vendors to demonstrate clean financial audits, anti-bribery controls, and component traceability. These requirements have led to a recalibration of shortlists across server and storage vendors, particularly affecting those with unresolved governance issues or delayed regulatory filings. Greyhound Field Note. In one field note, an organization planning a long-term AI infrastructure investment excluded a technically leading vendor due to red flags around internal audit results and board governance disclosures. The final decision was shaped not by performance or price, but by internal risk scoring linked to vendor transparency ratings. The learning for any hardware vendor, regardless of how performant their new server may be. Enterprise trust must be earned through governance continuity and operational clarity, not press announcements alone. Analyst in focus, Sanchit Gogia. Sanchit Gogia, or SVG as he is popularly known, is a globally recognized technology analyst, innovation strategist, digital consultant, and board advisor. SVG is the chief analyst, founder and CEO of Greyhound Research, a global, award-winning technology research, advisory, consulting, and education firm. Greyhound Research works closely with global organizations, their CXOs, and the board of directors on technology and digital transformation decisions. SVG is also the founder and CEO of the House of Greyhound, an eclectic venture focusing on interdisciplinary innovation. Copyright policy. All content contained on the Greyhound Research website is protected by copyright law and may not be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, displayed, published, or broadcast without the prior written permission of Greyhound Research, or, in the case of third-party materials, the prior written consent of the copyright owner of that content. You may not alter, delete, obscure, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other notice appearing in any Greyhound Research content. We request our readers not to copy Greyhound Research content and not republish or redistribute them, in whole or partially, via emails or republishing them in any media, including websites, newsletters, or intranets. We understand that you may want to share this content with others, so we've added tools under each content piece that allow you to share the content. If you have any questions, please get in touch with our community relations team at connect@thoffer.com.